Welcome back. Well, for the past few months, the state of the Liberal Party has loomed large. Polls point to an impending electoral disaster, another one. Policies are still up in the air and division is rife. It leaves the Albanese government to do as it pleases with too little accountability. Well, joining me to discuss is the Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly. Paul, great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Very good to be here, Shari.
Now, in your recent article, you write that the Liberals should really be focusing more on the economy and less on social issues. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, if we look at what happened at the last election, we can see that the Liberals lost in three big overarching strategic areas. The economy, Labor, incredibly, after what had happened for the previous 3 years, was seen as the superior party for economic management. Just think about that. So this was the Liberal Party traditional strength that had gone to Labor. Secondly, leadership. Anthony Albanese was seen as a far superior leader to Peter Dutton, having been a far superior leader to Scott Morrison previously. And thirdly, the preference system. Labor controls the preference system. So these are the three issues that the coalition and the Liberal Party has got to address. Now, the obvious thing to do after the election, given Labor's vulnerability on the economy, given that this is the traditional strength of the Liberal Party, the Liberals should have focused on the economy in order to get back their economic credentials. Now, this wasn't all that hard to do. The main requirement was to run a unified party, attack Labor's economic record and stress the economic principles on which the Liberal Party would run. They singularly failed to do any of that. And we had the extraordinary situation that this very low, this dismal Labor, this dismal Liberal primary vote of 31% at the last election fell to 24%. I mean, it's almost inconceivable.
It really is. We're now 7 months since the election. The economy is clearly struggling. We've seen inflation is sticky, and yet the Liberals still aren't seizing the economy as their primary issue. I think they don't have the strongest performer in Treasury. They've got Ted O'Brien, and instead they're focusing on mostly net zero, and now they're moving on to migration. Important issues, of course, but as you say, the economy is the single biggest issue for voters because of how families have been struggling for so many years now.
Well, the party's very divided and it seems not to be able to function properly. And while net zero is an important issue, it's by no means clear that the position on net zero will be a net plus for the coalition and for the Liberal Party. We'll have to see what happens when it comes to immigration. Clearly, immigration is a really important issue. But I come back to the question of the economy. This is where Labor is weak. I mean, it's just extraordinary. We've now seen that interest rates may well go up next year. Labor's got a government spending problem. It's got a cost of living problem. And so this should be the focus of the coalition and Liberal Party attack. This is where they need to get back in front.
Are you of the view that the Liberal Party is facing an existential crisis, or do you think the situation is not as catastrophic as many fear?
This is not just a cyclical situation.
It's not?
No, it's certainly not. I mean, this is a fundamental structural and cultural crisis for the Liberal Party. You can call it an existential crisis if you want to, but there's no doubt that this is the most important, the most significant crisis the Liberal Party has faced since Menzies formed the party. And it's got to be addressed at this level. So it's got to be addressed at the level of policy, at the level of philosophy, at the level of the economy, leadership and preferences. This is not being done.
That's a very big call, that this is the biggest crisis they've faced since the party was founded. Huge call.
I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, the primary vote is down to 24%. Well, now, that is an untenable level at the moment.
Well, I've interviewed people like the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and I've spoken to other very senior figures privately who do think this is cyclical and that the Liberal Party has had an identity crisis before. You know, the Malcolm Turnbull, Brendan Nelson leadership, Joe Hockey putting his hand in, that this is just a repeat of that, an ebb and flow.
I understand what those previous leaders are saying. I understand that. But I think the facts are such that the situation is much worse than what they describe. I think this is very clear from the polls. It's very clear from the state of the parliamentary party. It's very clear from the divisions. This was inherent in the terrible result in the May election. And what's happened since then? The party's in a much worse position now than it was last May. I mean, you can't pretend that this is just a cyclical issue. It isn't. And if that's how the party behaves, then it's just going to sink further and further.
And added to that, of course, we've seen just yesterday Barnaby Joyce, a former Deputy Prime Minister, no less, joining One Nation. How significant is this in your mind?
Well, this will damage the National Party. It is an act of disloyalty. Many people in the party would see it as an act of betrayal. It contributes to the sense of internal fracture within the coalition. I have to say, based on the evidence so far, it seems as though Barnaby Joyce did this for his own personal interest. He felt marginalised in the National Party. He's got more of a chance of self-promotion with One Nation. And when it comes to net zero, well, the National Party and the coalition embraced opposition to net zero, which was the position that he wanted. So it's hard to see there's any policy reason why he went to One Nation. It just seems to be about personal self-interest. I think that's particularly disappointing and particularly damaging. And it is a reflection on Barnaby.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, his original excuse, as you say, was because of net zero, but then the party's position was to dump it, and he still went and defected. Paul Kelly, look forward to reading your piece on Saturday. Do you know what you're writing yet?
I do. I'm writing a reassessment of Malcolm Fraser as Prime Minister, given that next weekend will be 50 years since Malcolm Fraser won the people's verdict at the 1975 election. Nobody talks about Malcolm Fraser these days. We talk a lot about Gough Whitlam, but we've got to remember Fraser won. Fraser was the victor in 1975 and he governed for 8 years as Prime Minister. Who was Malcolm Fraser? Well, I'm going to address that issue next weekend in the Australian.
And I mean, we had this conversation on Thursday, Paul, and I was surprised to hear that despite your anger at the dismissal, you then took a very fair-minded approach to Malcolm Fraser's Prime Ministership. So I look forward to reading your assessment on Saturday. Thanks so much for being here.